Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Career Search today. I am Paula. I'm going to be your host for this webinar. So, this webinar is going to be about prescribed fires. Each year, thousands, if not millions, of acres of land are lost to the ravages of uncontrolled wildland fires. Firefighters work long days and nights trying to mitigate the emergency so that they can help reduce the spread of a wildland fire. Today, we will discuss prescribed burns, as I said, and how those translate in the aid of prevention of combat of wildland fires across the globe. I'm honored to introduce you to our presenter today, Rick Campos. Sometimes I'm going to call him Rick, sometimes I'm going to call him Ricky, just FYI. So Rick began his career in emergency services while serving in the United States Air Force. During that time, Rick was assigned to the fire protection flight and served in many locations, including California, Texas, Saudi Arabia, and Afghanistan. After his enlistment, Ricky became a firefighter EMT for a small fire department in Northern California, where he later obtained his paramedic license and an associate's degree in fire science. In 2015, Rick became a civilian company officer for the Federal Fire Department in Northern California, that is made up of both active duty military and civilian personnel. There, he has been able to share his passion for fire and emergency services with the brave men and women who serve in our armed forces. Rick has a bachelor's degree in emergency management and has been working as a fire and EMS instruction since 2015. Thank you, Ricky, for being here. Just a quick note before we begin. We have included the slides as a handout. You can download it. If you have any trouble doing so, just send me a quick note in the chat and I can send it to you separately. Also, Ricky will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so make sure that you send those in the chat. If you want those to be live, just add the word live at the beginning of your question and I can unmute your mic. He will be answering those after the sliding course or at the end of the presentation. With that said, Ricky, I'll be in the back end and now I'll let you take it from here.
Wow. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Paula, for that wonderful introduction. That bio, wow, it makes me sound a lot cooler than I think I am. So, hey, bravo to whoever wrote that. But first of all, then I want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you're calling from. I want to thank you all for joining me today on Fighting Fire with Fighter, Fighting Fire with Fire Prescribed Burns. Today, we're going to go over quite a bit. Basically, prescribed burns and what they are, what they do, and how they benefit. All right, well, let's get some questions out there. All right, so let's get some questions. What do you think a prescribed fire means? All right, do you think it means literally fighting fire with fire? Do you prescribe mean like prescription, like medicating a fire? Or are we going to be removing potential for a large catastrophic fire? So let's go ahead and answer that. See what you guys think. You got that, like I said, literally fighting fire with fire. I know that's an old term, but it's still used. It could be used in this potential topic. Medicating a fire, right? We're going to give it some aspirin. I don't know. What do you think? Or just removing the potential for possibly a large catastrophic fire. And like the bio said, I do live here in Northern California, so I have a little bit of experience with some larger fires, and we'll get into that later on in the broadcast. Wow, 100% removing potential for a large catastrophic fire. That bravo, everyone. That is exactly what it is. So when we talk about the prescribed fires, we're going to be talking about just that. So what is a prescribed fire? What's a prescribed burn? Well, it is a management practice that aims to remove deadwood and other fuels such as biomass with the main objective of reducing fire risk. And now we're going to really get to the undergrowth, haha, no pun intended, but we're going to talk about that as well of why it is important. So when we're getting into our prescribed fire burns, there's a lot of things that we need to consider. And one of the two main things is both weather and soil. Now here in this slide, it's a very simple subject, right? You have the cool cloud with the sun. You also have the little plant there. But there's a lot more that goes into it. When we talk about weather, and we'll get more into it later on in the broadcast, but when we look at it, we have to look at many different things that are included in weather, such as relative humidity, such as wind speed, such as temperature. And when we get to soil, there's even more scientific things that we need to be considerate of, such as what is in the soil. How does the soil going to burn? And what is exactly underneath the soil. And we'll talk a little bit about that as the broadcast continues. Now, when we do a prescribed fire, we're doing it not just to really maintain or get rid of some of that fuels. What we're using it for is to promote and maintain a lot of the already environmental issues that are going on in that area. So when I say promote, well, as we get further in, we'll talk about how wildland fires actually promote better growth. And we talk about maintain, we'll discuss how prescribed fire burns will help us maintain an area to prevent it from becoming a catastrophic fire. Now, what is a prescribed fire used to do? Well, it's one to reduce fuel loads like we talked about. We're going to use it as a wildland prevention tool. It's also used to maintain forest types, benefit the growth of forest by controlling disease, and the development of wildlife habitat characteristics. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking development of wildlife habitat characteristics, but you're burning it down. Yes, in the in the short time. But as we burn an area, what we do is we actually release nutrients into the soil. And when we release those nutrients into the soil and the growth returns, it returns more luscious, it returns healthier, it returns so that deers, mice, other animals can come back and feed on that, on those luscious plants that have now grown because the soil's been healthier, so that way it actually will promote them more animals coming to that area. Now, when we do a prescribed fire burn, as we will go into it further, it will be done with really trying to not negatively affect offsite social values. And when we talk about social values, we're talking about agricultural areas, we're talking about residential areas, we're talking about different areas that this smoke possibly, or even the fire, can be a detriment to. So fire brings smoke. I mean, it's easy, right? You ever heard that term where there's smoke, there's fire? Well, here you go. This is exactly what we are going to be producing. We are going to be producing smoke. So regardless if it's a small burn or a large burn, smoke is going to be produced. But why is that a nuisance? Well, when we talk about prescribed fire burns, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, like we said, remove that fuel, but we also know that smoke is a production of it. So we have to look at the surrounding area and understand where that smoke is going to go to. Is it going to be a nuisance for nearby communities? Is it going to increase the risk of accidents on roads and maybe harm poultry farms or even other agricultural areas? When we burn something, we are basically taking a fuel and we're atomizing it, right? We're making it a airborne fuel now. Well, that airborne fuel gets into the air and now it is becomes a carcinogen. Now, for those of you who live in California, you'll know that a lot of times the air is filled with smoke. I could tell you right now, this picture looks like home, right? So a little teary-eyed. No, just kidding. It does look like home in a sense that the smoke will create a layer around the layer of smoke in the area that it's been affected. And when we are dealing with smoke, we also have to look at what is it doing to the residents in that area. Here in California, we do have an air quality control manager who sends out messages to let the people know that, hey, the air quality is poor today. If you have asthma or you're part of the elderly population or even the young population, it's best to stay indoors. Schools have even been told that if there is a large smoke in the air, that recesses will only be held indoors, and same with lunches and gym. So you could see how smoke, while it might not be such an effect in some areas, the more smoke, the more it will affect the areas that are around it. So we have to be aware of that. Also, you have to understand the increased risk of accidents, especially as that smoke creeps onto roadways. Now, light smoke's not a problem, but you got to think if it's dark and now there is a smoke production on a roadway, it's hard for drivers to see. I could only equate it to driving in really dense fog. prescribed burns can produce, right? They can produce smoke, right, which can be a bad thing, but they can also produce things for the soil, which could be a good thing. Now, I'm no plant guy. I got no green thumb, I'll tell you that right now. But my wife does, and she loves houseplants. I mean, up until a few months ago, I didn't even know what a variegated plant was. Now I know it's a plant that has like beautiful colors on it. It's, part green, maybe part white or pink. It's just got different colors and it's beautiful, right? I didn't know about that. And then as I talk with my wife, we're talking about the different soils and how, certain plants need this soil and certain plants need that soil. So what I've also learned is that by naturally burning an area, the ash and the remnants of the fire can release phosphorus into the soil. And phosphorus is a very important nutrient that actually helps the plants grow bigger and stronger. So it does have a benefit. And it also will increase the mineral nitrogen in the soil as well. So as we talked before, right, when an area gets cleared out by fire, after the fact, it grows back more luscious and it grows back greener. And this is really a way for those animals to come back once it does grow greener and may produce and become bigger, more of that habitat. So not only is the fact that the minerals get into the soil and helps the area grow back. But let's use it as a metaphor for life, right? Sometimes we get burned over, but hey, just know you're going to grow bigger and stronger. Prevent and reduce. So when we look at a wildland fire, we look at the fact that we are going to prevent the accumulation of nutrient capital that would otherwise occur naturally, right? So what are we doing? Well, we're really just housekeeping. So when we do a prescribed burn, we are literally cleaning house because as more and more debris falls on the floor of, let's say, an area, more dead debris, more things like that, the harder it is for maybe low level seedlings to actually grow because something's blocking the sun. Okay. And then also, the more it accumulates, the more fire load. And the more fire load, the bigger the fire, right? I mean, makes a lot of sense, right? So if we were to clear it out, controlled in our own controlled manner, that we will prevent a further catastrophic fire because we're actually taking away a lot of the fire load. For instance, all right, I'm gonna use a good example here. I am a dad, and so naturally a dad loves mowing lawns, right? So I love to mow my lawn. But I've noticed that if I wait more than a week and a half to mow my lawn, I have to empty out my bag multiple times in order to get my lawnmower to cut correctly. Now, what does that mean? That means that it grows, and that means my blade doesn't do as well as it should, right? Now, if I cut my grass before a week and a half, like say in a week's time, my blade does less work. All right, so let's look at this in the wildland fire aspect. So if we were to wait and let the growth continue and let the dead growth fall on the floor, a fire will happen, but it will become more and more and more. It'd be harder for firefighters to put out. They'll have to work harder. Now, if we clear the floor and it's controlled and there is a fire, maybe if there is ever a fire in that area, because that's what we're trying to prevent, but it can happen, then it will not be as hard for the firefighters to work to clear it up or to they will also be able to prevent from spreading into residential areas. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're well, more really trying to prevent it from moving on into a residential area and actually taking away lives. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on the broadcast. I know I said that more than one time, so that's why I need you guys to stick around, that we are going to be talking about how it will impact residential areas. And here it is, Australian land management. Wildland fires don't just happen in California or the United States. They happen all over the world. And Australia has had some of the most massive wildland fires that this world has ever seen. So, but before we move on, let's take a poll. Who's ready to take a poll? I'm ready. You're ready. Let's go. What is your experience with wildland fires? Are you one that has a little bit of experience? Are you one that has moderate experience? Or are you the kind of person that will stand on a table and say, I am an expert at wildland firefighting? Because if that is you, then I want to party with you because you sound like a fun person. So, little experience, like I'm talking about, do you like kind of stomp it out, like someone threw out a cigarette butt, you stomp it out? Awesome. Moderate experience, you've done a little bit, or that straight up, like I'm a hardened veteran that has seen fire on all counts kind of person? Let's go ahead and answer up that poll while I get this drink of water here. Good stuff. Good stuff. Got to stay hydrated. Got to stay hydrated. Got to keep that voice going. Got to keep that voice going. All right. What do we got here? All right. So we do. I know you probably, some of you are being very, very humble, and I thank you. All right. Having the little experience or the moderate experience. So, great, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about it. Let's talk about Australia. All right. So in Australia, there are prescribed burns, and they are considered a stable part of the land management toolkit. Now they are routinely applied, and they're reducing the risk of large unplanned wildfire to the property infrastructure. So why is this becoming, here it is, the staple part of land management toolkit? Ooh, man. Well, let me tell you why. All right, let's paint a picture for you guys. All right, I want you guys out there to close your eyes. Now I'm gonna take you back in time here. We're going to February 7th, 2009. Okay, you're in Australia. Mind you, I said February. Here in the United States, February 7th is probably a cool month. It's right after the holidays, right? So it's nice and cool. Maybe winter in a lot of areas. Here in California, it is nice. Usually we get a little bit of rain, but not too much. But in Australia, February 7th, 2009, Black Saturday. On this day, they had over 400 wildland fires going on. A lot of them were actually deliberately set. Fires were raging so quickly and so intense that firefighters, once they arrived on scene, they could do nothing but let this fire pass over them. Houses were destroyed. So the fire bureau there in Australia, they have like a measuring system. 0% is like a 0% chance there's going to be a fire today. Then they have 100%. So it goes 0 to 100%, so 100% chance there's going to be a fire today. On this day in history, they say there was a 200% chance of a fire happening, and it did. They did. So what does that mean? That means that if someone had sneezed wrong, a fire would have started. And that's exactly what happened. I don't know about the sneeze part, but fires had happened so quickly and so intensely. Matter of fact, in this one, they had winds up to 62 miles an hour. They had zero rain in the area, and the temperature of this day was 115 degrees. So as we talk a little bit about weather and how it affects wildland behavior, this was, sadly to say, a perfect storm. With the heat, with the no relative humidity, with a very minimal relative humidity, and also the winds, this was the prime recipe for a wildland fire. And so 400 were there, 10 of them were actually multiple were lit on purpose. So it started February 7th. Do you know when it was controlled? It wasn't controlled until March 14th. So almost a month of fires raging there in Australia. So because of this, so many new things were put in place, right? Sadly to say, a lot of us have knee-jerk reactions. So one of their knee-jerk reactions was, okay, so we need to figure out what went wrong and how do we prevent it from happening again. So of course they created some new policies. So there's the recognition of defensible space. And in that, let's go back one more slide. So we'll talk about the defensible space, how there is the recognition of it. Okay, so they wanted in Australia to clear 50 meters of space around the home. Okay, and then they also do prescribed burns. But here in the clearing space, here in California, or what we try to promote is 100 feet of space around the house. When we arrive on a house for triage, if we have to do structure protection, we'll arrive and we'll try to clear out that 100 feet of space just to give that house a fighting chance. And when I say clear it out, we are moving chairs away from houses. We're trying to take away decks. Whatever we can do in a short amount of time, we are trying to do to give that house the best chance of survival. All right. And what Australia's trying to do is they're trying to prevent another Black Saturday from happening. Now, Australia's policy, they do 5% of total land area under the state jurisdiction must be burned each year because they know that they need to burn in order to prevent things from happening again, right? So 5%, you know, maybe that's just a minimum, maybe that's a maximum, but they know what they need to do, so they're trying to get this put in place. Okay, and it doesn't discriminate between ecosystems, and of course, there's going to be widespread criticism for ecologists. Now, this can be a very kind of touchy subject. The reason I say that is because what are we looking at? We have to do a risk versus gain, and now the Australian government has to understand, how many residents they lost in 2009. Okay, they need to understand, how much was burned in 2009, and if we have to sadly hurt an ecosystem in order to prevent that, can we do it? What I didn't mention in 2009, that they actually lost 173 people. 1,737 square miles were burned and 2,079 homes were destroyed. So by having a prescribed burn, sadly, I hate to say, some things are going to have to suffer, but in the greater scheme of things, is that something that might be beneficial? And I know it's got to be a hard decision to make, but I guess when you have the risk versus gain, and by no means am I an expert on this at all, but when you look at the risk versus gain, you have to look at the bigger picture. And I'm sure that they try to make accommodations where they can. Now, it can also lead to specific declines, but let's look at some of these cases here where it's actually restored. So like we talked a little bit about a little bit earlier, so ecosystems are to create fine-scale fire mosaics of mixed successional stages to encourage greater faunal and floral diversity. So like I said before, when a fire does happen, it does release phosphorus and nitrogen into the soil. When it does this, it makes those plants grow back more beautiful, more luscious, and healthier. Now, just like if they were to open up a Costco right down the street from my house, right? Everyone will be coming to this area because the food is plentiful. Well, animals are no different. They would understand that, hey, that area over there is looking really good. Hey, Bambi, you want to go over there and get some food? Yeah, let's do it. Let's go over there. So they'll go over there. And then, of course, through the scat and other, wildlife, they will be able to spread that as well. So it might hinder at first, but in the longevity, it actually might help. So, like we told you before, we're going to fight fire with fire, right? But we need to do it responsibly. This isn't just like, hey, let's go ahead and throw down a match and see what happens. No, no, no. This is something that has to be planned and has to be methodical and it has to be checks and balances. Because without that, that could be a big problem. So you need to understand a couple things. One, why are we burning? And then two, what are we trying to accomplish? Why are we burning this area? Is it because we want better growth? Is it becoming overgrowth? Is it just in need? Is it looking like it is going to be an impact to the ecosystem or to the residents? And what are we trying to accomplish? Those are two main things we need to really realize before we set fire on the ground. So our burn site information. With the burn site information, we are looking to have so much information because we need to understand exactly what we're burning, why we're burning, and here's the important part, when we're burning. We need to know timing. We need to know the season. We need to know the weather. We need to know the amount and type of land, types of consumable fuels, of the surrounding areas, and special considerations. I know, right? It's a lot, but hey, we're going to get to it. Timing. Are we going to burn in the afternoon? Hold up. Let's talk about that. Why would you want to do that? Or why would you not want to do that? Well, in the afternoon, surface fuels have been heated up and drying, so it may lead to faster and more unusual growth. So let's have an example here. Let's take, I know I'm in my house, so we're going to talk a lot about like house examples. Let's take a shirt out of the washer, right? We take a shirt right out of the washer. It's nice and soaking. We put it outside to dry early in the morning, okay? So early in the morning, sun's not up, shirt's still wet. It gets to about 9 o'clock, sun's coming up a little bit, it dries a little bit. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, sun is out, and that shirt has had all those hours to dry. Here's my little thing. Had all those hours to dry. So now it is not only dry, but there's really a lack of moisture in it. So if we were to set that shirt on fire, not to say that you would, but if you did, it would burn rather quickly. Same with grasses, same with fuels. In the morning with the morning dew, it's probably not going to burn quickly, if at all, right? But as the sun has been beating down on those fuels throughout the day, the drier it gets. So the more apt it is to catch on fire. Now, for your purpose, that might be all right. But what you have to consider along with timing is all the different land issues, because if you set that on fire and it takes off, ooh, your prescribed burn might now become a wildland fire. And that's a hard letter to write to the chief, if you know what I mean. All right, so you also got to know about the winds, such as the location. So like, what are the winds going to do? And can they change at certain times of the day? Like, I'll tell you this, in my area, I know that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the winds shift from east to west and north to south. Now, what does that mean? But that also means that it's been heated up all day long, and now the winds are going to just blast. We have anywhere from 15 to 20 mile per hour winds in my area. So I know that around 4 o'clock, I could look at my crew and say, hey, guys, get ready. We're going to get called out. And sure enough, around dinner time, we always get called out for a wildland fire around the season. Now, the season's been longer and longer, but we also understand that we know when the winds change. Because if you are doing a prescribed burn, and let's say in my area, you do a prescribed burn, you started at 3, it starts going, and everything's working well, and you've planned it to go a certain way, but at 4 o'clock, those winds shift. Now, everything you may have not prepped can be possible a liability for being engaged in a fire. And then again, you're taking a prescribed burn, and now it's going on to a full-on emergency. Know your seasons. So again, I have lived in different areas, so I understand the different seasons. I know that in Texas, it's just hot. It's just, let's just be real, it's just hot. But that's also, I've lived in Arizona as well, and there again, it's hot. Like, I'm a Southwest guy, so I know the whole Southwest. But also we know that in Texas, it's got a lot of relative humidity, and relative humidity is great for the air. It's the moisture in the air. So we have to understand when that relative humidity is good, because the lack of relative humidity, anything below 30%, is a possibility of fire. So they try to get you between 30 and 55 is where it's a good area to burn. Okay, so know your seasons. Know when that is the right time to burn. So certain areas have seasons that can contribute to rapid growth of wildland fires. Here in California, we have basically January to January now, right? Go figure. But when you look at the weather, you have to look at the seasons, but then look at the weather and the wind direction. You got to know the speed, you got to know the temperature, and you also got to know the relative humidity. That wind direction is very important because, like I said, you could prep all day if the wind goes east to west, but you need to understand that it could possibly go from, again, north to south or west to east, thereby just everything that you've done has now become a liability. So the speed, the wind speed, that's another thing. Like we talk about in the 2009 Black Saturday fire, the wind speeds were up to 65 miles per hour. Holy moly, that is quick, right? And that is not just pushing a fire, but it is also pushing embers. So as the fire, so this is what's crazy, right? The fire will actually drive things as it's putting push forward. So it's actually creating more of a hostile environment forward. And then these embers come off of this fire, fuel comes off of this fire, and now it heats it up. And now the heated up area now is very more likely to catch on fire. So it just jumps. It continues to jump and continues to jump. So you have to understand the speeds in the area. You got to know the temperature, and you also got to know the relative humidity. Like I said, we want it between 30 and 55. Anything below 30 is it's dangerous, very dangerous. Anything above 55, I don't think it's going to burn. All right, let's talk about the amount and type of land. So here, I'm going to paint another picture for you. Let's talk about the LNU complex fire here in California, right? That happened in August 17th of 2020. The reason I talk about this one is because I was actually on this fire. This fire went over 5 counties and it burned 363,000 acres. So on this fire, let's paint another picture for you guys. Get my little paintbrush out for you, right? Little happy trees, happy burning trees. No, not burning, not happy burning trees. No, so there we were, all right, in this fire. We were driving the streets, and of course this, I mean, if I this looked like Armageddon. On the right and the left of us was just burning hills. These burning hills were just embers, and it looked crazy. It was something literally out of a horror movie. Well, we get tasked with structure protection. My crew pulls up to this wonderful house, and we start clearing the area. This house was on a slope, so we have to understand that, fire goes up, and we were at the bottom of this slope, and the fire was at the top of the ridge. Cool. We were actually in a very safe zone. So we're prepping this house, but as the fuels start getting into the trees, what starts bombarding us? Pine cones. Now, these aren't your little baby pine cones, right? These aren't like the ones you see on cartoons. No, these were football-sized pine cones. I know you think I'm exaggerating, but I'm 100% real. These things were like footballs. I might be exaggerating, but they were huge, right? And these things had caught on fire. They become aerial fuel, and they start dropping at the top of this slope. And where did they go but down against this house? By the time we had everything pulled off, we had a pile of these pine cones up against this house. And before we could even realize what was going on, half of that house was already on fire and it got into the rafters. Sadly, we had to cut and run. I had to look at the benefit of my crew and the safety of my crew. So, and these pine cones were coming; they weren't stopping. So we had to cut and run. So understand that, and understand that fire behavior will actually run up a slope as well. So if you are doing a prescribed burn at the bottom of a slope, know that the fire will be pushed up that slope. Now that's fine as we talk about fire breaks later. If there is a fire break up on the top of that slope, such as a flat area and then to another slope, but what you have to be careful of is the growth that is happening on that slope, because as that slope heats up, embers and so on and so forth can go ahead and jump on over to another area, which is a area that you did not feel that was going to be part of your prescribed burn. And again, sadly, you've taken a prescribed burn now to a full-fledged wildland emergency. So know that, know your terrain, and know the aspect of it. You should have a site map with any of your paperwork that you do use, so that way not only can you see it, your crew see it, but the county health department see it as well. It's really good to have a good reconnaissance of what you're going to be burning and how it's going to be burning, so that you can get a full-fledged picture of what's going to happen. So we've talked a lot about fires and we've talked a lot about fuels, but we really haven't dug down deep into the different type of fuels that are out there. Okay, I just talked a little bit about aerial fuels, so you'll see that: crown, aerials, trees, football-sized pine cones, right? But let's talk about ground. We're looking at leaf, litter, roots, etc., such as peat. Have you ever heard of coal fires? Like, there's underground edge coal fires. These have been burning for years, and some of them have been burning for centuries. So those, once they get underground, ooh, bad time. It is not. It is very hard to get rid of them. So when we look at the ground, we're not really just looking at the typical on the ground type of thing. We're looking at roots. We're looking at duff. We're looking at peat. There's actually peat fires that will burn for days and months because it gets in the roots and it goes under the ground. When we talk about surface fuels, we're looking at forbs and trees that are less than 6 feet tall, shrubs, etc. Again, those can actually become ground fuels because it can get into the roots and the roots can get underneath the ground. So that's why it's very important when we do our prescribed fire burn is to understand our soil, understand what is going on. And sometimes it's really, really hard to see what it is exactly we're burning. But then we get to the crown aerial trees. I'm going to say it again, pine cones, right? Those kind of give me anxiety now. And then you also have structures such as home, barns, etc. Now, very important to mention these structures, because when we talk about structures, you know, let's say we do a prescribed burn and there is a structure, right? A lot of times fire departments will use old, structures that have been abandoned or have been given to them by the owner to burn. It helps them just get rid of it. It gives training to the fire department. It's wonderful, right? It's a win-win-win. But we have to be careful of what's but basically inside that house and what is that house made of. So when I say what's inside that house, I mean, how many times have you gone into either your grandfather's garage or your dad's garage, and there's oil, there's paint, there's a bunch of toxic chemicals in there that can actually pose a problem to firefighters as they start fighting that fire. So it's really good to get your reconnaissance around that to understand exactly what you're burning. When we're looking at the surrounding areas of our prescribed fire plan, when we're looking at that, we have to look at the burn history of the area. Now, I know what you're thinking, like, why do I have to know what happened in that area? Well, just like anything, unless you study the past, you're doomed to repeat the future, right? I think that's how it goes. But anyway, so when you look at the surrounding areas and you look into the history, you have to realize, when did it burn last? Did it burn last? What happened? Did it take off? When they burned at this certain time, did the wind shift and did it take off in a way that was unprecedented? What do we have to plan for? When you do a prescribed burn, you have to have as much knowledge, and I'm going to be really kind of just really dramatic on that. You need to have as much knowledge as possible so that you can prepare for the worst. You want to hope for the best, right? Of course, we want to hope for the best, but we need to plan for the worst. In the military, they always say, what can go wrong will go wrong. So we always have to look at that. So if we look at the history of this, you'll understand how to mitigate any situations that might happen. Like any good general that goes into battle, they always study any battles in that area that have happened previous so they can understand their enemy properly. And that's what we have to look at fire as our enemy. So we also have to look at what has been done and what could have been done differently in that area. So let's say we do go for a prescribed burn area and that area has taken off and it has become one big nasty mess. Well, what did they do and how can we not recreate that? By having that lesson taught, we're able to really prevent any type of large emergency from happening and pretty much mitigate it before it even hits the ground. Special considerations. Here's all the fun stuff, right? Here's all the cool hazards. Not cool, not at all. But we have to look at plants and animals. For instance, in my area, we have what's called the tiger salamander. We also have, I believe it is called the California golden carnation. All right, these are two endangered species. So when we do a prescribed burn in our area to prevent a catastrophic wildland from happening, we have to ensure that there is no habitat that is going to be destroyed, such as the tiger salamander or I believe it is the California golden carnation, or I think it's called the California gold. So we have to be very careful that we do not disrupt those. So if we have to cut fire lines around possible areas, we will do that. And we also have to have a doctor of ecology with us as well, so that they can see the area in which we're burning and they actually have to approve it. And we have to set up routes and traps for any tiger salamander that will escape to that area, and then they can place it back in its natural habitat. So you always have to look around, right? We're trying to do this in a way that helps us, but also doesn't hinder the growth of the local ecosystem. Okay, we have to look at local burn restrictions. Again, here in California, I know, right? This is like the wildland fire capital of the world. Not really, but it's pretty big. We have them pretty readily. We have to ensure that it is a burn day before we do any prescribed burn. So the area has to be prepped and it has to be okayed by any developer or any by county inspector, and we have to make sure that it is a burn day. And the reason we have to ensure that is that we have all these factors put into a category for us so we can check them off to ensure that the relative humidity is good, to make sure the air quality is all right enough that if we were to produce smoke, that we are not going to hurt anybody in those special categories, such as asthmatics, or anybody with a respiratory disease, anybody with elderly or pediatric. We have to make sure that we are in the parameters of our local guidelines in order to do a prescribed burn. We also have to have the information on local hazardous areas such as power lines. Now, power lines, that's a huge thing right now because we are seeing more and more of those cause wildland fires in the more unpopulated areas, and then that actually leads to big catastrophic fires such as the campfire. I don't know if you guys have heard about the campfire, but the campfire was actually started by a power line that I believe broke down, and it started this and it took out the town of Paradise, and it was pretty catastrophic. There is many documentaries on it, but we learned a lot from it. Sadly, that something like that has to happen for us to learn. So we really have to look at that, and not to take away from that, but also to look at the surrounding areas. If a fire is to get into those areas, what are we facing? Okay, because when we take that prescribed fire burn and make it into a full-fledged emergency, we have to look at what are we going to face. Are we going to face power lines? Are we going to face gas lines? Are there wells? And that might be a hazard as far as a firefighter falling in, or could that even be an asset in the fact that we are trying to gain water through drafting operations? Is there impassable fences? So, that is going to hinder us from fighting fire as that fire moves forward and it goes through an impassable fence. How are we going to get to that other side? So there's a lot of things we need to consider before we put anything on the ground. And as I say anything, I mean fire. Are we, it's not just like, cool, we're going to light a flare, throw it, and let's see what happens. No, it doesn't work like that. So many parameters you have to follow in order to do a prescribed fire burn. Okay. And then, of course, we need to look at our preventable measures. What are we doing to prevent this thing from getting out of control? And we'll talk about that pretty soon when it comes to fire breaks. Site prep and planning. Take a little bit of water there. So site prep and planning. So this is the nuts and bolts of the prescribed fire burn, because this is everything you need to do in order to get it done right. Let's take a poll real quick. How important do you think site prep and planning is in a prescribed burn? I think it is, I don't know. You tell me. Is it critical, moderate, or just not important at all? Like, meh, I don't really care. What could it be? Eh, we'll figure it out. One of those things, right? You guys ever do one of those? Like you plan for a vacation and you're just like, yeah, we'll figure it out. And it ends up being like the worst vacation ever, or sometimes maybe the best vacation. I know, comparing a vacation to wildland firefighting, oh man, kind of like apples and oranges. No, not even close. All right, let's see those answers. Let's see, let's see. It is very critical. Good job. You are nailing it today. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys are paying attention. You guys are just in this. I love it. All right, site prep. All right, we need a written description of what we are doing. We need to understand the natural fire breaks, and these are rivers, these are rock formations, mountain passes, things like that. All right, we need to know the composition. We need to know the width. Why is the width important? Well, the width is very important, and we'll get right back. We'll get right to that after we talk about construction fire breaks. Again, same thing. You need to know the constructive fire. These are the man-made ones. These are the ones that are, the roads. These are, maybe large dirt lots. These are man-made. Okay. So why do we need to know the width? Well, we need to know the width of our fire break and the width of our fuel, because if the fuel is larger or longer than our width, then let's say a tree can fall down and over our fire break and then create a fire bridge, if you will, to light the area that we were not intending to burn on fire. So it is imperative. Big red words right here. Ensure no, absolutely no. It's a big no. Ensure no fuels cross the fire break. So we make sure that you take in consideration the width or the height of your highest fuel, and make sure that that fire break is wider than that. In your prescription plan, you need to know the ranges of weather, temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, forecasted wind shifts. You got to know the ignition method. How are we going to light this thing on fire, right? Are we going to use a match? Are we using a drip torch? Are we using a flare? Are we shooting a flare? Are we just taking a flare and lighting things? You need to understand what you're doing, because it is all about the predictability of certain ways to light a fire. Know your fire behavior. Okay, know when it's in the growth state, know when it is going to be, it's in the smoldering state, but also know that when it gets in the smoldering state, it can rekindle. You need to have smoke management methods such as knowing the wind direction and speed, knowing kind of getting a plume idea of where that smoke's going to go. With the wind and the speed, that smoke is going to go maybe away from residences during this time of your prescribed burn. That's awesome. It's exactly what you want. Or if it's going to go towards, maybe we might need to rethink this prescribed burn. Understand the smoke is going to be on highways and roads. Are we going to need to close them? We do not want to cause any accidents. And then also let's look at the smoke sensitive structure areas such as the airports, animal confinements, agricultural areas, because as things burn, like I said, it does give off smoke, gives off carcinogens. And while it might not hinder us so much, think about the animals that it might, like such as a poultry farm. It might hinder the chicken's lungs, and it might cause detriment to the actual agricultural or the farmer. Always remember this, a good action plan will include actions to take in the event that the hazardous smoke conditions arise. So prepare, prepare, prepare. That's what we're trying to say here. Have that action plan. Have an idea of what's going to happen if it doesn't go out your way. Ignition and holding plans, contact. So this is what we need to do. You need to make the contacts. In the forms, so we have ICS forms. When we do a prescribed fire burns, it is not like we have a prescribed fire burn plan. No, we have a ICS form, and it is pretty much as a wildland. We have an incident action plan. We have the reports. We have everything. We have the, I believe is the ICS form 200 series. So we have to fill these out to the detail of what we're going to do. Okay, so in it, we're going to need to have some contacts. Who we're going to need to contact? Well, we're going to need to contact maybe local residents before the burn, county health department, and we need to see if we need any special permits that we're going to need before we burn. Now, know the county health department. Why do we need to contact them? Well, we are dealing with smoke and fire, right? So we need to understand if there is anything in that area that might become inhibited by that smoke. Again, always know your weather conditions. Know your weather. That is, I think we've hit that like 4 or 5 times in this broadcast here about knowing your weather conditions. Know those weather conditions, because if you know those, you know the way that the wind goes, you know which way your fire goes. Okay, types of ignition patterns being used. Are we going to be using a V pattern? Are we going kind of a amoeba look? What are we trying to do? And that way, if you have a set path, you can set your teams up in order to prevent that fire from getting out further and have your lines cut if needed. Always, always, always. This is like this is like the coup de grace, if you will, right? Complete the go, no go checklist prior to burning. Now, in this checklist, it is a detailed, did you call the Department of Health? Did you call the police department? Did you call this person? Did you call that person? Do you have this? Are the lines cut? Is the weather conditions favorable? What's the relative humidity? It gives you basically a big summary of all the things that you need in order to really put fire on the ground. Without this go no go checklist, I want to put fire on the ground because you do not know everything. This is seriously, guys, this is like trying to predict a gamble. Maybe like that, right? It's like trying to predict a gamble, which you want a sure thing. You want to do everything in your power to make sure that this gamble pays off, right? So you want to make it a sure thing. All right, and that's what the go no go checklist helps you do. Contingency plan, like I said, plan for the worst, right? Hope for the best, plan for the worst. So always have a contingency plan, a backup plan for a backup plan. And then if you need another backup plan, why not have another backup plan? So by having a contingency plan, you're going to be able to handle changes in fire behavior. You're going to know what's to do in the undesirable fire behavior conditions. Equipment failure. What happens if engine pump just gives out? I've been on fires like that where we've ran out of water when our pump has failed. So we had to have a plan in place in case that does happen. Or even if one of your crew members gets hurt, or there's a personal injury on the premise. And also, you want to clearly identify a few things, right? Each person's responsibilities, of course, right? And then how will the information be relayed to each person? But let's look at LCES, LACES, right? You need to really communicate your location, your lookouts, your communication, escape routes, and safety zones, LCES. Understand those when you're dealing with wildland fire. Even if this is a prescribed burn, we still have to go over LACES That way, all of our team members know exactly what to do in the event of emergency. And when we talk about communication, we need to determine, is it going to be nonverbal through hand signs, or is it going to be through radio traffic? Mop-up plan. This is the worst. No, it's not. It's not. But this is like cleaning up after you've already had the party. Okay, this is trying to clean up before mom gets home. So mop-up plan. What are we trying to do? This is all the post-burn activities. So we're gonna have our assignments. We're gonna have to know exactly what needs to happen in order for this mop-up to be complete. So we need to know who will monitor the area after burn and how long will they monitor it for. Who will determine when that fire is completely extinguished? And then how will they determine that fire is extinguished? So knowing the who will monitor, who will determine, and how will they determine is instrumental in ensuring you don't get a rekindle, because there's really nothing more embarrassing than getting called back at 2 o'clock in the morning because the fire that you thought you put out just came back to say hello. Ugh, the worst. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you guys so much. Let's open this up to questions. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in with me today, and we had a great broadcast. Hopefully, you guys learned something from this. I had a great time, but let's open this up to any questions out there.
Thank you, Ricky. This was fantastic. I don't see any questions in the chat. You still have a few minutes, so if anyone has a question, feel free to just type that in the question box. We'll be reading it, and Ricky can be answering all of them.
Yeah, type anything. Hey, ask me. I don't know. How's this beautiful painting behind me? Oh, so it's just what I do on the weekends. It's fun. It's fun stuff. Ask me whatever you need to ask me. If we need to go over anything again, I'd be more than happy to go over anything again. I am so thankful for this opportunity to join Career Cert on this webinar today.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic presentation. Want to thank everyone for joining today, and just want to say one more time, you can visit us at careerstart.com anytime for more webinars, more resources, any sorts of resources. They're free. We have practice tests, we have blogs, articles, we have a little bit of everything. So feel free to just go to our website, careerstart.com, and if you want to learn earn free C hours for today. Thank you for attending. You'll be receiving an email in the next 48 hours. You're gonna have access to take the test. Once you complete that, you'll just receive a certificate with your hours.
Awesome. And not to mention, Career Cert also has great instructors. I mean, these instructors have seen time in the field, so you're getting someone who pretty much has seen it all and done it all. So by gaining the experience from them, you yourself are going to probably learn some great techniques, and we're always learning from you as well.
I can agree with that. Yep. All right. Well, there is no question. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you for connecting today. Thank you, Ricky, and stay safe. Take care.
Stay safe, everyone. Thank you, Paula, so much. Again, thank you all for joining me today, and you guys have a great day. Have a safe shift if you're on shift, and have a great day and stay safe as well.